The novel Jazz, written by Toni Morrison, shares the love affair between Joe Trace, a 50-year-old salesman who is married to Violet Trace, and Dorcas, a 17-year-old girl. Joe tracks down Dorcas after she leaves and he shoots her. Dorcas dies as she resists medical assistance that only arrived the next morning.
When Violet attends Dorcas's funeral, she attempts to slash her face with a knife in her casket in front of everyone. Throughout the novel, Violet attempts to learn more about her husband's dead lover by connecting with Dorcas's aunt, Alice Manfred. The novel continuously switches perspectives and time periods to mirror the sound of jazz music.
Starting with an unnamed narrator who introduces the Traces' present life in Harlem in 1926, and switching to the lives of Golden Gray, the biracial son of Vera Louise, whose maid is Violet's grandmother, True Belle, and Henry Lestroy. The main characters of the novel continuously face discrimination and suffrage as a result of being a colored man or woman during the Harlem Renaissance.
Considering Morrison's work can be compared to that of a jazz musician, Jazz portrays multiple stories of Violet, Joe, and other characters who have influenced their lives. The past and present conflicts in this book come together to create a rhythm conveying the freedom and sense of identity derived from the Harlem Renaissance throughout the novel's stylistic components.
Author Toni Morrison's Jazz conveys a sense of freedom throughout the novel using stylistic expression. Jazz displays a single melody differentiated by syncopation and repetition. A seminar paper's title, The Importance of Jazz Music in Toni Morrison's Jazz by Elena Kramer, speaks for itself. Though jazz itself is not a sheet of music, Morrison's work can be compared to that of a jazz musician's. The paper claims that Toni Morrison establishes a connection between the single pieces and therefore achieves to combine the various solo voices into one smooth piece of art. The single pieces that Morrison uses are the different characters and their perspectives throughout the novel. Through the perspectives change, making the novel difficult to follow at times, this criticism claims that though using elements of jazz music, the stories and perspectives connect into a single piece of art. One character that Morrison uses to display the connection of music is Dorcas's aunt, Alice Manfred, who describes her negative take on jazz music. She explains it faked happiness, faked welcome, but it did not make her feel generous, this juke joint, barrel hooch, tonk house music. Syncopation in music is when there is an accent that falls on an unexpected beat. The emphasis here is put on the word music because of the preceding set of abundant adjectives that it is untraditionally separated from. This type of sentence structure used by Morrison's uncommon, similar to the way that the structure of jazz music is free from traditional and common music styles. Alice implies that her negative view on jazz is because of what the style entails, such as a sense of rebellion and risque culture that Alice believes could result in negative treatment from others based on racial discrimination. This sense of rebellion, however, was seen as a step toward freedom by most people at the time. This sense of freedom is further portrayed through similarities of jazz and jazz music by the novel's use of repetition. In a passage that retrospectively describes Violet and her personality types, it explains how that Violet knew that the knife was in the parrot's cage and not in the kitchen drawer. That Violet knew and went right to it, and that Violet had to push aside, elbow her way into the funeral. By repeating the phrase, that Violet, Morrison emphasizes how much Violet feels that she wants to be a separate person than who she is. That Violet is Violet, and Violet wants to become detached from this personality trait. The repetition can be compared to a jazz riff, a set of notes played over and over again, usually while improvising in a piece of jazz music, to accent a certain feeling, like Violet's repulsion of her second self. The syncopation and riffs used in these parts of jazz portray the character's sense of freedom through the writing's freedom from common structure. Jazz conveys that the exemption from traditional writing found throughout the novel is also derived from its history, the Harlem Renaissance. This freedom, however, can be interpreted in various ways, including nonconformity and freedom from oppression. The narrator of Jazz, still unnamed, describes their take on those who moved to the city in the 1920s, saying, "How soon country people forget. When they fall in love with the city, it is forever, and it is like forever, as though there was never a time when they didn't love it." Violet and Joe moved from Vesper County into the city. As many people during the time period saw it, the city is popular due to its appeal of excitement and new opportunities. The Harlem Renaissance became known as the New Negro Movement, making people want to go there to start a new life. Though it continues to entail hard work along with discrimination and unfair treatment toward African American people, these characteristics of the city are overpowered by its excitement and freedom. The narrator continues to display its excitement. "I'm crazy about the city. Here comes the new. Look out, there goes the sad stuff, the bad stuff, the things nobody could help stuff. History is over, you all, and everything's ahead at last." During the 20th century, African Americans had been enduring the apparent negative impacts of racism and oppression, or the bad stuff. Moving to Harlem made African Americans almost forget their past hardship of facing devastating discrimination in the South because it was more detrimental than in the North, where Jim Crow laws were not adopted. For Violet, Joe, and the narrator, Harlem and all it entails, a new era of jazz and culture, makes them feel ahead at last in life.
Throughout the novel, almost all of the main characters are, or at least parts, African American. Morrison uses these characters to show the impact of being a colored man or woman during the Harlem Renaissance. As the Great Migration occurred, people from all around the world came to the fields to work. Violet describes how everybody with fingers in a 20-mile radius showed up and was hired on the spot. $9 a bale, some said, if you grew your own, $11 if you had a white friend to carry it up for pricing. This experience illustrates the unfair treatment many African Americans received based solely on the color of their skin. Even if a colored man or woman worked just as well or even harder than a white man or woman, they would receive less pay. Throughout the novel, the characters' racial identity impacts their everyday lives and affects how other people treat them. In Chapter 7, the unnamed narrator introduces the character Golden Gray, named after his golden locks of hair. For almost all of his life, Golden was told he was a white man and lived his life as if he was one. Although he was biracial, he had light skin and golden hair, which kept him from becoming a slave and owning one instead, who is Violet's grandmother, Truebell. However, his life changed when Truebell tells him that his father was actually black. He then sets out to find his father in Virginia and finds out his name is Henry LaTroy. When he finally confronts his father, Henry says to Golden, "I know why you came here, to see how black I was. You thought you was white, didn't you? She probably let you think it. But Golden said that she protected me and I could have been a slave. However, Henry said that they got free niggers, always had some free niggers, you could be one of them." Golden responded to his father by saying he didn't want to be a free nigger, but he wanted to be a free man. Growing up believing he was a white man, Golden never dealt with the stereotypes that came with being colored, and instead believed these stereotypes too. He believed that if his mother raised him as if he was a black boy, he would have lost opportunities he was given to, such as being a free man. Henry enforces to Golden that he must choose who he wants to identify himself with, and if he chooses black, he told him to act black, meaning draw your manhood up. By finally being faced with the truth about his race, Golden has the decision to make on who he will identify himself as. Morrison depicts the major theme of race by showing the way African Americans were treated by white people and the importance of knowing one's own identity.
In the world of jazz, the music of the times holds a huge role in how the characters live their lives and act in their society. Whether it be through Joe, Dorcas, or Violet, music is conveyed through them in every decision that they make. When the narrator is describing the jazz music in the city of New York, he explains how, up there in that part of the city, which is the part they came for, the right tune whistled in the doorway or lifting up from the circles and grooves of a record can change the weather from freezing to hot to cool. The way the author describes the music, it comes across as an almost supernatural power or a force that cannot be seen so much as felt all around you. This reference to temperature holds a symbolic meaning to the sexualization that came with this type of music and its ability to make someone feel a certain type of way, whether it be excited or saddened. This ability of the music and the range of its influence brought on a time of scandalous acts, violence, and rebellion that was new to this society, and these ideas are portrayed through each of these stories' characters. Later on in the story, the narrator describes how they did not know for sure, but they suspected that the dances were beyond nasty because the music was getting worse and worse with each passing season. The Lord waited to make himself known. Songs that used to start in the head and fill the hearts had dropped on down to the places below the sash and the buckled belts. This period was known as a Renaissance because it was a bringing forth of ideas that had not been seen in the past. This music was a huge change to past methods as it came as a shock to establishments like the church, who had so long preached their opposition to sexualization. The jazz of the time can almost be held responsible for the affair between Joe and Dorcas because this new period of loss of previous morality led to many acts that were before thought unacceptable. This effect of music was not only relevant during the Harlem Renaissance as it can be seen in today's society. Although music has experienced a huge shift from what we heard during the 1920s, there is still much relevance to how music has an effect on our society today. In an article on how music is affecting today's youth, the author describes how, in all styles of music nowadays, there are a plethora of songs with lyrics that glorify sex, drugs, and violence. While researchers can't concretely link the cause and effect behavior of listening to these songs with directly inducing this type of behavior, many researchers and people agree that it surely encourages it. In today's world, there are so many social issues among youth that it brings up the question of what is the cause for it. One topic that has a clear influence on youth is the music they listen to, as so often today we see lyrics with drug references and sexual lyrics. Just as jazz brought about a breakaway from ideas of the past, modern music has inspired the same sort of situation. In another article regarding music and youth, the author explains how lyrics of songs that advocate substance use usually also refer to violence and sex themes. In many cases, they gain positive association among teenagers and may have respective consequences. Teenagers and young adults often idolize the artists of the music that they listen to. So when this said artist uses lyrics about how great drugs are, the teens begin to hold these substances in a positive light. This was the same effect as jazz rose to popularity because, as scandalous activity was promoted through the music, many people began to believe it was an acceptable way to live their lives. The lesson here is that while music can be a great form of expression, we shouldn't buy into everything that is pushed by the artist behind the music.
Jazz, which depicts life in the mid-1920s and mid-19th century, contains a lot of two-sided prejudice between black and white culture. The characters, who are almost all entirely African American, struggle to cope with their feelings of oppression and lack of a cultural community. They received unequal treatment in society, and in many cases it led to tragedy. One example is Dorcas's mother, who was killed after her apartment burned down. It was revealed to us by Alice Manfred, the aunt who took her in after the death of her parents, that Dorcas was sleeping across the road with her very best girlfriend, but did not hear the fire engine clanging because when it was called, it didn't come. Segregation was still very prominent during this time period, and it was not considered unusual if African Americans did not receive the same treatment as white individuals. In this case, we can blame Dorcas's mother's death on the fire engine that never came to save her. Due to the fact that she was black, law enforcement figured that she was not worth their time to save. Sadly enough, Dorcas died in a very similar situation years later. When her best friend recalls the night that Joe shot her, she tells Violet that Dorcas had laid down on the bed, bleeding out, and her friend had called the ambulance. But it didn't come until morning after she had called twice. The ice, they said, but really because it was colored people calling. Here's yet another example of African American lives being wasted because the people that were supposed to come and help showed up too late or not even at all. This lack of equal treatment had many people to question their identity, and the segregation led to a mutual disrespect between black and white culture. Golden Gray, born half black and half white, becomes very questionable about his identity when he learns about his black father. After first realizing that his father was a black man who began wondering how that was possible. His physical appearance, which included of golden locks, would convince an individual that he was full white. In the late 1800s, the setting for this portion of the story, mixed-race children were unheard of, and Golden Gray had always thought that there was just one kind, true Bell's kind, black and nothing. Any half-white, half-black individual at this time would have been outcasted in public. Despite Golden Gray appearing to be totally white, he felt as if his whole identity was fake and began questioning his true descent. When talking to Henry, his father, Golden expressed his disapproval with his own identity, exclaiming that he wanted to be a free man. Now that Golden Gray has learned that he is half black, he feels as if there is an inescapable oppression he's going to face in his life. He sees a comparable difference between being a free black man and a free white man, which is due to the fact that these races are not viewed as equals in society. After hearing this, Henry replies that if Golden Gray chooses to be black, he gotta act black, meaning draw his manhood up quick like and don't bring him no white boy sass. Henry's advice to Golden Gray suggests that he should either act black or act white, instead of like the mixed-race individual that he is. Segregation and racial tension in society at this time were so dominant that they existed in the way people acted and prevented any association with two different cultures.